The first rule Calla had learned from her grandmother was simple. You don't ask why someone is bleeding, you just stop it. The second rule was quieter, learned not by words but by watching. You don't turn anyone away. Not the farmer with the infected hand. Not the woman with bruises shaped like fingers. Not the wolf with an arrow in its side who had dragged itself to the door 3 winters ago and waited on the step until Calla opened it. She had kept both rules for 3 years, alone in the cabin at the edge of the world. The forest that pressed against the eastern wall had no name on any map she had ever seen. The village of Drennick sat 4 miles west, close enough to reach in an emergency, far enough that no one came unless they needed something. The road between her door and the village was a dirt path overgrown at the edges, more suggestion than fact. She had widened it herself the first spring, cutting back the brush with a short blade until she could walk it without ducking. She had not done it again. The forest took back what it wanted. She didn't mind. The solitude suited her. Her grandmother had built the cabin with her own hands, or so the story went. The walls were thick stone up to the window height, then timber above, and the roof had been repaired so many times that Calla couldn't tell anymore which parts were original. The hearth took up most of the north wall. Dried herbs hung from every beam, valerian and yarrow, and the bitter bark she boiled for fever. Bundles of them, so dense that in summer the cabin smelled like a field, and in winter like a memory of one. She had grown up here. She had buried her grandmother in the clearing east of the well. She had stayed because there was nowhere else she belonged, and because people needed her, and because leaving felt like abandoning something she couldn't name. The tension at the border had been building for weeks. She knew it the way she knew weather, not from any single sign, but from the accumulation of them. The farmers who came for salves and tinctures spoke in lower voices than usual. A man from Drenwick had come 3 days ago with a gash on his forearm and mentioned, while she stitched it, that there had been rogue wolves seen near the eastern pass. Not the organized kind, he said. The feral kind. The kind that didn't follow territory lines or respond to authority. Calla had listened and kept stitching. She had treated wolves before. The hierarchy of the shifter world was not her business, but she understood its edges the way anyone understood the edges of a thing they lived beside. The Alpha King held these lands. The wolves who moved through her forest were his, mostly, or at least they followed his rules. Rogues were something different. Rogues were wolves that had broken from every structure, and broken wolves were unpredictable in ways that had nothing to do with teeth. She checked her stock of wound-packing herbs that evening and found it lower than she liked. She added it to the list. The night was clear and cold when they came. She heard them before she saw them. Not the sound of movement, but the specific quality of silence that precedes it. The way the small animals of the forest go quiet when something larger is present. Calla set down the clay bowl she had been mixing a poultice in and stood without rushing. She took the lantern from the hook by the door. She pulled her wool cloak around her shoulders. She opened the door. 7 wolves stood in the clearing. They had arranged themselves in a loose arc around the front of the cabin, close enough that the lantern light caught the planes of their bodies, the musculature, the breath visible in the cold air, the eyes catching the light and throwing it back. 7 pairs of eyes, all fixed on her. Calla stood in the doorway and looked back at them. Her pulse had lifted, but her hands were steady. She had learned through years of treating things larger and stronger than herself that the body reads intent before the mind catches up. These wolves were not coiled for attack. They were waiting. There was a difference, and she trusted the distinction. "All right," she said. Her voice came out even. One at a time. She stepped forward with the lantern raised and began to move along the arc, not quickly, not with the darting movements of something frightened. Deliberate. She looked at each wolf as she passed, checking, assessing, the same way she assessed any patient who couldn't speak. The 6th one she reached was the largest. He was set slightly apart from the others, at the center of the arc, and the rest had left a gap of space around him that she would have found meaningful if she'd had time to think about it. She didn't think about it. She crouched with the lantern and looked at his left foreleg. The wound was deep. Something had torn through the outer muscle above the paw. A blade, she thought, not a bite. The edges were clean in the way blade wounds were clean, already beginning to close the way shifter wounds did, but not fast enough. Whoever had done it had hit something significant. This one, she said, more to herself than to anyone. She rose and went back inside without looking to see if he followed. She gathered what she needed. Wound packing cloth, the drawing salve she kept in the clay pot nearest the hearth, a clean length of linen. When she came back out, he was there. He had moved to the step and was watching the door. She sat in the dirt in front of him and got to work. He didn't move while she cleaned the wound. He didn't flinch when she pressed the drawing salve into the deepest part of the cut, even though she knew it pulled. He watched her with amber eyes that tracked her hands with an attention she had felt only once before, from a wolf that had been near death and was measuring very carefully whether she was the thing that would end it or the thing that wouldn't. She bound the wound with linen, wrapped it twice, tied it at the top. "Don't walk on it more than you have to," she said, sitting back. "Come back in 2 days if it closes wrong." The amber eyes held hers for a moment. Then he turned his head and looked at the other 6, and she noticed for the first time that they had maintained the arc around her the entire time she'd been working. She was inside the circle. She had been inside it since the moment she stepped forward with the lantern. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees, and walked back to the door. By morning, they were gone. She stood at the door with her first cup of water and looked at the clearing. The grass held the pressed shapes of where they had been, the bent impressions already softening at the edges. By evening, even those would be less distinct. In a day or 2, they would be gone. She went about her morning. It was the locked chest at the foot of her grandmother's bed that she had been avoiding for 3 years. She had opened it twice, once on the day of the burial, when she needed to find the deed to the land, and once 6 months after that, when she was looking for a specific preparation her grandmother had used for deep infections. Both times, she had taken what she needed and closed the lid without looking at anything else. The chest held her grandmother's personal things. The deed, the land records, a pouch of coins she had added to over the years, and beneath all of it, a journal with a cover of dark leather so worn the surface had gone soft. She had never read the journal. She had told herself it was privacy. The dead deserved their thoughts. That night, unable to sleep, she took it out. Her grandmother's handwriting was small and careful. The letters formed with the precision of someone who had learned to write late in life and never stopped being deliberate about it. The early entries were practical. Plant records, treatment notes, the kind of observations that a healer made to remember what worked. Kala read these quickly, scanning. And then she found the entry that stopped her. It was undated, different from the others in tone, shorter, as though it had been written quickly and not returned to. "I haven't told her. I keep deciding to, and then looking at her face and deciding not to. What would I say? That her mother didn't leave because of grief? She left because she could smell what Kala was going to be, and it frightened her? That there are things in my own blood I never told anyone, not even him, not even at the end? She deserves to know. I know she deserves to know. But some truths change a person before they're ready to be changed, and she's not ready." Kala read it 3 times. Then she read the entry before it and the one before that, building backward through the context her grandmother had buried in offhand sentences across years of writing. The word appeared twice more in the next 20 pages she read, each time sideways, each time as though her grandmother had almost said it plainly, and then pulled back at the last moment. Not just human. She sat with the journal in her lap for a long time after that, the fire low, the cabin quiet around her. She didn't finish reading. There was too much, and she was too tired, and her hands had developed a faint unsteadiness that she didn't want to examine closely. She set the journal on the table and went to bed. She didn't sleep until nearly dawn. In the thin gray light before full morning, caught between waking and not, she thought about the amber eyes that had tracked her hands so carefully while she worked. The way the wolf had stayed still, the way the others had arranged themselves around her without being told. She thought about the word her grandmother had circled once, in an entry she would read fully tomorrow. Not just human. She closed her eyes and let the morning come. The river that ran along the northern edge of her land was not wide, but it was cold in every season, fed from somewhere higher up in the hills where the snow never fully left. Calla came to it 3 times a week to fill the large clay jars she kept on the shelf beside the door. The path was 10 minutes on foot, a little less if she didn't stop to check the stands of yarrow that grew along the bank. She stopped to check the yarrow. She was crouching at the water's edge with her second jar when she saw him. He was face down on the opposite bank, half in the water, one arm extended toward the current, as though he had been trying to pull himself forward and simply stopped. The water moved around his wrist and kept going. He didn't. Calla set down the jar. She crossed at the shallow point 30 feet upstream, stepping from stone to stone without thinking about it, and reached him in under a minute. She crouched, pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck. His pulse was there, slow but present. She turned him carefully onto his back. He was large. That was the first thing, the practical thing. Broad through the shoulders, heavy set with muscle rather than bulk. The kind of build that belonged to someone who had spent years doing something physically demanding and had never stopped. Moving him alone was going to be unpleasant. The second thing she noticed was the wound on his left forearm. She went still for a moment, looking at it. A deep cut through the outer muscle, the edges clean in the specific way a blade made clean, already partially closed. Partially, but not fully. It had reopened at some point, probably when he fell, and bled into the fabric of his sleeve. She had wrapped a wound like this 2 days ago. She sat back on her heels and looked at his face. Dark hair, damp at the temples. A short beard, close-cropped. Features that were sharp, even relaxed, the jaw set even in unconsciousness. He was pale in the way of blood loss rather than complexion, his actual skin tone several shades warmer beneath that. "Well," she said to no one. She got him back to the cabin by a combination of methods she would not have described as elegant. He regained partial consciousness somewhere on the path. Not enough to speak, but enough to bear some of his own weight when she pulled his arm across her shoulders and told him to move his feet. He moved his feet. She counted that as cooperation. She got him through the door and onto the low bed she kept in the main room for patients. He was unconscious again before she had his boots off. She worked methodically. Cut the sleeve away from the wound. Cleaned it. The cut was the same one she had treated on the wolf. She was certain of it now, not as a suspicion, but as a fact she had simply not yet decided what to do with. The edges matched. The depth matched. The placement on the forearm, the angle of the blade that had made it. She packed it properly this time, with better materials than she'd had outside in the dark, and bound it with clean linen. Then she pulled a chair to the side of the bed and waited. He woke an hour later. She watched it happen. The gradual return of tension to his face, the slight movement of his hands before his eyes opened. When they did, they were amber. The exact amber she had seen in the dark 2 nights ago, thrown back by lantern light. He looked at the ceiling. Then he looked at her. "You're in my cabin," she said. "You were in the river. You have a wound on your forearm that I treated 2 nights ago on a wolf at my door." She paused. "You don't have to explain anything. But I'd appreciate knowing if I should expect whoever made that cut to come looking for you here." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. His voice was low, rougher than it would have been at full health. "No one is coming." "All right." She stood. "Then drink this." She handed him the cup she had prepared while he was waking. Water mostly, with willow bark steeped into it, and a small amount of the tincture she used for pain that wasn't debilitating but was present enough to pull at concentration. He looked at the cup. Then he drank it without asking what was in it. She noted that. "What's your name?" she asked. A pause. "Callum." "Calla." She took the cup back. "You're a traveler." It wasn't quite a question. He answered it anyway. "Yes." She didn't say anything to that. She went to the hearth and added wood to the fire, and when she turned back he was watching her with that same quality of attention she had felt in the dark. Precise, assessing, taking in more than a casual glance accounted for. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "Should I be?" He didn't answer. "You're not the first wolf I've treated," she said, "or the first one I've had in this bed for that matter. A female with a broken leg spent 4 days here 2 winters ago. She was considerably more difficult than your being." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, adjacent to it. "Lie still," she said. "The willow bark needs time." She went back to the work she had been doing before she found him, the preparation she had been in the middle of, the sorting of dried herbs that had been waiting for 2 days. She did it at the table, with her back partially to him, because she did not want to sit and watch him, and she did not want to hover. He didn't try to leave. He lay on his back and looked at the ceiling, and the cabin was quiet except for the fire and the soft sounds of her work. The warmth started about 20 minutes in. She noticed it as a physical thing first, a pressure in her chest that was not unpleasant, low and steady, like standing near a fire from a comfortable distance. She had been tired all week, sleeping badly since the night with the journal, and she associated the warmth with that tiredness at first, the body doing something strange in exhaustion. But it didn't fade when she moved away from the fire. It was there when she was at the shelf on the far wall, when she stepped outside briefly to check the drying racks, when she came back in, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees at the threshold. The warmth remained, untethered to any external source she could locate. She stood at the door for a moment with her hand still on the frame. On the bed, Callum had turned his head and was watching her. She let go of the frame and went back to the table. She didn't look at him again for a while. She focused on the work in front of her, on the specific textures and smells of each herb, on the list she had in her head of what still needed doing before winter pressed closer. Practical things. Grounded things. She was good at grounding herself. Her grandmother had taught her that too. When the body gives you information you don't understand, you work. You do the next task. Understanding comes later. She worked until the light changed. By late afternoon he was sitting up, which she took as a good sign. He had color back in his face. He was looking around the cabin with the same attention he'd given everything else. Methodical. Cataloging. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 3 years alone. My whole life before that with my grandmother." She didn't look up from the pestle. "She built the cabin. The border forest. Yes, you treat wolves from the territory. I treat anyone who comes to the door." He was quiet for a moment. "That's an unusual position to hold." "It's the only position I know how to hold." She set the pestle down. "Are you hungry?" He ate the broth she made without comment, which she had learned over the years meant it was acceptable. Men who found food lacking said so. Men who ate in silence were either too hungry to be critical or satisfied enough not to bother. She judged him the latter. Evening came. The temperature outside dropped the way it did in the weeks before the first frost, quickly and without much warning, and the cabin became the warm center of a cold world. She added more wood to the fire. He was still on the bed, still watching everything, and she was becoming accustomed to the weight of that attention in a way that made her faintly uneasy when she examined it directly. She was reaching for the second lamp when she heard voices outside. Not at the door, further back near the tree line. One voice, low and urgent. She couldn't make out words. She glanced at Callum. He had gone very still. She watched him make a small movement with his right hand, a single gesture, deliberate, directed at the window that faced the tree line. Not a signal she recognized, not any language she knew, but it was a signal. The certainty of it was in the way he made it. Not the reflex of a man swatting at something, but the precise, practiced movement of a man communicating with someone who already knew what it meant. The voice outside stopped, footsteps, retreating. Then nothing. Calla lowered the lamp slowly. She had not seen the exchange. She had heard the voice, watched Callum's hand, and heard the voice stop. The connection between those three things was not ambiguous. She set the lamp on the hook and said nothing. He looked at her. He was measuring something. She could feel it. "I'm not going to ask," she said. "It's not my business who travels with you. But if whoever that was comes into my clearing without my permission, it becomes my business." "They won't," he said. She nodded and went back to what she'd been doing. She did not sleep well that night, but not because of him. He slept. She could hear the steady quality of his breathing from where she lay on her pallet near the hearth, the deep evenness of it. It was her own thoughts that kept her awake. She lay on her back and looked at the dark ceiling and thought about the journal on the table and about the warmth in her chest that had not fully left since the afternoon, and about the hand movement Callum had made at the window. The kind of gesture that came from authority so settled it didn't need to announce itself. She thought about what kind of traveler carried that. She was still thinking about it when she woke before dawn to find the bed empty. The blanket folded at the foot, the cup rinsed and set upside down by the water basin. A thing she noted without knowing what to do with it. Gone then. She stood at the door and looked at the empty clearing in the gray early light. The pressed shapes in the grass from 2 nights ago had almost faded. In a day or two, they would be gone entirely. She went inside and put water on for the morning and sat at the table with the journal. She had told herself she would finish reading it today. She had been telling herself that for 3 days. She opened it to where she had stopped. The entry she found was longer than the others. Her grandmother's handwriting was slightly larger here, as though the words had needed more room than usual. "I have been trying to find the right way to write this for years. I don't think there is a right way. So here is the plain version. I am not what I let people believe. Not fully. My mother was a wolf who chose a human man and buried what she was so completely that by the time she had children, she had almost convinced herself it wasn't real. I did the same. I was better at it than she was, maybe, or just more practiced. But blood doesn't disappear. It waits. I can feel it in Calla sometimes, the way she reads a room before she enters it, the way animals come to her without hesitation, the way pain doesn't reach her face the way it should when something hurts. She has her father's features and my mother's blood and no idea what any of it means. I should tell her. Every year I should tell her, and every year I look at the life she's built in this cabin, and I think, let her have 1 more year of not knowing. Calla sat with her hands flat on the table on either side of the journal. 1 more year, and then another. And then her grandmother had died, and there had been no one left to tell her anything. She read the entry again. Then she closed the journal, stood up, and went outside to check the drying racks, because the work was there, and it needed doing, and she did not yet have words for what was sitting in her chest beside the warmth that Callum had left behind when he walked out before dawn without saying goodbye. Lord Vance arrived on a Tuesday, which Calla would remember afterward, not because the day mattered, but because she had been in the middle of something that required both hands and had to stop it half-finished to answer the door. She had heard the horses first. More than one, moving at the deliberate pace of men who were not in a hurry because they didn't need to be. She wiped her hands on the cloth at her belt and opened the door before they reached it. There were 6 of them. 5 soldiers in the colors of a house she didn't recognize, a dark green she associated with the lowland nobility, the kind of men who had land to the west and opinions about everything east of it. The 6th was the one who mattered. He rode slightly ahead, on a horse too fine for this road, dressed in a wool coat that had been expensive once and still carried itself that way. He was perhaps 50, lean in the way of men who ate well but didn't enjoy it. His eyes moved across the clearing with the quick assessment of someone who was already calculating what the space was worth. "Calla of the Border Forest," he said, not a question. "That depends on who's asking." She stayed in the doorway. "Lord Vance of the Western Holdings." He didn't dismount. "I believe we have something to discuss." "I'm not aware of anything we need to discuss." "The land," he said, "on which your cabin currently sits." She looked at him steadily. "This land belongs to me. My grandmother built this cabin. The deed is recorded at the Drennick Registry. Deeds recorded at village registries have a way of becoming complicated when the land in question borders contested territory." He said it pleasantly, the way a man says something he has practiced enough that it no longer sounds like a threat. "There are questions about the original claim. I'd like to resolve them. Then write to the registry. I'd rather speak to you directly." We're speaking! Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, recalculation. He looked at the cabin, at the drying racks along the side wall, at the worn path between her door and the well. She had the distinct impression he was not seeing any of it. He was seeing the land beneath it, the position of it, the way the border forest sat between two territories like a seam. "I've heard you treat wolves," he said, "the shifter kind, from the territory to the east. I treat anyone who comes to the door." "Anyone," he repeated. "That's an open policy for a woman living alone at the edge of contested land." He tilted his head slightly. "The wolves that use this forest, they come and go from your property freely. You've been seen working on them, speaking to them." He paused. "I imagine you hear things." "I hear what patients tell me. I don't repeat it." "That's a careful answer." "It's the only answer I have." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, which was worse than the assessment had been. "I think you should come with us," he said, "to the town. There's an alderman there who handles land disputes, and I believe a conversation in a more formal setting would serve both of us." "I'm not in a dispute with you." "Not yet," he said. The two soldiers nearest the door had not moved, but they had shifted their weight in the small, preparatory way that men shifted weight when they were about to be told to do something. She saw it. She calculated the distance between herself and the door, and herself and the well, and herself and the tree line, and knew that none of those distances helped her. "I'll need to secure the cabin," she said. "Of course." She went inside. She took the journal from the table and put it in the locked chest. She took the deed from the chest and put it inside her vest, against her skin. She took the short knife from the shelf by the door and put it in her boot, not because she intended to use it, but because it was there and leaving it felt wrong. She closed the door and went with them. The road to the border town of Crest Ferry took 2 hours on horseback. She rode behind one of the soldiers, which she found indignifying in the specific way of things designed to make a point about status. The forest thinned as they rode west, opening into scrubland and then into the flat, wide land of the lowlands proper. By the time the town came into view, she had lost the smell of pine and gained the smell of horses and bread and the particular mix of animals and mud that all market towns carried. Vance installed her in a room above the main inn and left 2 soldiers at the door. "You're not under arrest," he said from the doorway. "You're a guest. There'll be food shortly." He closed the door. She heard the soldiers settle into position outside. She stood in the center of the room and took stock. The window faced the town square, 3 stories up, too far to drop without consequence. The door was the only exit and it was guarded. The room itself was clean, better than she would have expected, with a proper bed and a basin of water and a lamp already lit against the evening dark. She was not under arrest. She was a guest who could not leave. She sat on the bed and thought about what Vance had actually said, separating it from the manner in which he had said it. The land dispute was a pretext. She was nearly certain of that. A man who genuinely wanted to resolve a deed conflict did not bring 5 soldiers to collect a single woman from a cabin. He wanted something else, and what he had circled in their conversation, without ever landing on it directly, was the wolves. He wanted to know what she knew. The question was what he thought she knew. She was still working through it when her senses did something strange. It had been happening in small ways since the night with the 7 wolves, moments where her perception stretched further than it should. A sound from across the room that was too quiet to carry. A smell that identified itself in more detail than smells were supposed to. She had been cataloging these moments in the back of her mind without fully examining them, the way she cataloged symptoms in patients before she had enough information to draw a conclusion. Now, sitting in the room above the square, she heard 2 men talking in the alley below the window. The window was closed. The alley was at least 40 feet away. She should not have been able to hear them. She heard every word. They were discussing a patrol route. Nothing significant. But she heard it. The specific cadence of each voice. The scrape of a boot on stone when one of them shifted. The soft sound of a hand against a wall. Every detail, clean and separate. The way sounds came through when you were standing next to their source. She pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose and breathed. She went to the locked chest. Not this chest, the inn's chest, which held nothing of hers. She sat on the floor in front of it and put her back against the bed and took the journal from inside her vest. She had been carrying it without thinking. She'd reached for it before she reached for anything else. She opened it to where she had stopped that morning and kept reading. Her grandmother had written, in the entry following the one she'd read at dawn, "The bond is the part I can never explain to her without showing her." How do you describe a warmth that has nothing to do with temperature? I felt it once, young, before I knew what it was. I thought I was ill. I treated myself for fever for a week before I understood. By then, the man had gone and I hadn't known enough to follow, and I've spent the rest of my life knowing that I let something real walk away because I didn't have the language for it. Calla read that sentence twice. A warmth that has nothing to do with temperature. She had felt exactly that, in the cabin with Callum, for the better part of an entire afternoon. She kept reading. Her grandmother's entries grew shorter and more fragmented near the end. The handwriting changed, the letters less precise, the thoughts less finished. But the thread was there. The blood, the senses, the things that shifters experienced that sat differently in someone who was half, or a quarter, or a degree further removed, muted but present, waiting for something to wake them. She found the word her grandmother had used for it near the back of the journal, in an entry that was only 3 lines long. Dormant. That's what my mother called it. Not gone, not absent, sleeping. Everything sleeping, waiting for whatever wakes it. Calla closed the journal. She sat on the floor for a long moment with her hands in her lap, the room quiet around her. Something had woken then. She was not going to pretend, sitting here in a locked room 40 feet above the ground, that she didn't know when. The night with the wolves. Or more precisely, the specific wolf she had treated in the dark, whose wound she had cleaned and bound, and who had watched her with amber eyes that understood every word she said, and then had appeared in her river 2 days later with the same cut on a human arm, and lain in her bed and watched her work with the same quality of attention, and made a hand signal at her window that stopped another person mid-sentence. She turned that over carefully. She had felt the warmth when he was in the cabin. She had felt it still, faintly, in the hours after he left. It had not fully dissipated. It was there now, muted, like an ember that hadn't gone cold. Her grandmother had called it a bond. She pulled her knees up and leaned her head back against the bed and looked at the ceiling. "Well," she said softly, to the empty room. "That complicates things." She ate the food they brought because refusing it would have accomplished nothing, and she needed to think clearly. She slept badly, but she slept. In the morning, she asked the soldier at the door for water and received it, which told her something about the parameters of her captivity. She was being managed, not punished. Vance wanted her cooperative. If he intended to drag her name into a council argument, bruises and visible force would weaken the version of events he meant to present. Men like Vance preferred pressure that could still be called consent if anyone important asked. That meant he still needed something from her. She was at the window watching the square when she heard it. A conversation from the floor below, clear as if she were standing in the room. 2 men, one of whom she recognized as the soldier who'd brought her water. The other was new. She was treating his wolves directly, the new voice said. Not just strays, the ones from his territory, regularly. Vance thinks she has information. Vance thinks she's an access point. Get her talking about the wolves, find out what she knows about the eastern route, find out who she's treated and when. A pause. He doesn't need much, just enough leverage to bring to the council. And if she doesn't cooperate, then she becomes a different kind of useful. She stepped back from the window. She looked down at the journal in her hands and thought about the word her grandmother had written in 3 lines near the back, the word she had circled once in an entry from years earlier. Dormant. She thought about the warmth in her chest and the sounds she shouldn't be able to hear, and the way the 7 wolves had formed a ring around her without being told, protective in a way she hadn't recognized until later. She thought about Callum, gone before dawn, blanket folded, cup rinsed, no explanation offered, and none asked for. She didn't know who he was. She knew what he wasn't. He wasn't a traveler in the way travelers moved, alone, unnoticed, accountable to nothing. The man at the window had moved with authority that other people recognized without being shown it. The kind of authority that didn't need introducing. She sat back on the bed and waited, because there was nothing else to do. And she had been waiting her whole life in one way or another. She was good at it. What she was less good at was the feeling currently sitting in her chest. Not the warmth, which had become familiar in the way that strange things become familiar when you live with them long enough, but the other thing, the anger. Low and controlled, the kind that didn't flare but built steadily, over hours, the way a fire builds when you keep adding to it slowly. She had treated him. She had brought him in from the river and cut his sleeve and cleaned the wound and fed him and let him sleep in her bed. And he had lain there and said, "Traveler, a traveler." She pressed her fingers against the journal cover and breathed evenly. She would deal with that later. Right now she had to think about Vance and what he wanted and what she was willing to give him, which was nothing. But nothing required a plan, and plans required information, and information required patience. She was patient. She opened the journal to the last entry her grandmother had written, the final page, the one she had been saving without acknowledging she was saving it. The handwriting was barely legible, large and unsteady, the letters of a woman who was very ill and writing anyway. If she ever finds this, if she ever reads this far, I want her to know that I was not trying to take anything from her. I was trying to give her time. I know that's not how it will feel. I know she'll be angry with me, and she'll have every right to be. But she was so happy, Calla. In that cabin, in the work, in the life she built from nothing. I didn't want to crack it open before she was ready. I hope she's ready now. I hope whatever is waking in her is waking gently. I hope whoever wakes it is worthy of her. That's all I ever wanted. For someone to be worthy of her. Calla sat with that for a long time. Outside the window, the town square went about its business, indifferent to the woman reading her dead grandmother's last words in a locked room above it. A cart went past with vegetables. 2 children ran across the square and disappeared into a side street. A dog investigated something near the well. She closed the journal. She put it back inside her vest, against her chest. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling and let the anger settle into something more useful. Something harder and quieter that she could actually work with. She had a deed in her vest. She had a journal. She had senses that were apparently extending themselves whether she invited them to or not. She had a locked door and 2 guards and a lord who wanted leverage. And somewhere to the east, she had left a pot half filled with unfinished preparation on her workbench, in the cabin that had been her grandmother's and was hers, on land that no one was going to take from her. She was going to need help getting back to it. She didn't let herself think about where that help might come from. She wasn't ready for that thought yet. She closed her eyes and started working through what she knew, methodically, the way her grandmother had taught her to approach any problem she didn't yet have words for. You start with what you know for certain. You set aside what you only suspect. You wait for the space between them to close. She was good at waiting. She heard them before she saw them. It was the 3rd morning in the room above the square, and she had developed a routine of sitting at the window in the early hours when the town was still quiet and her extended hearing had less to filter. She had stopped fighting the phenomenon and started using it, tracking the guards' shift changes, cataloging the patterns of the inn staff, building a map of movement and timing that she had nowhere to apply yet but kept anyway. The sound that reached her that morning was different. Not a conversation. Not the scrape of boots on cobblestone or the creak of a cart on the road. It was a quality of silence spreading outward from the eastern road like a wave. The town didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet in stages, person by person, the way a crowd quiets when something enters its periphery that it doesn't know how to categorize. She leaned closer to the glass. The eastern road met the square at the far corner, past the well. She watched that corner. Callum came through it on foot. He was not alone. Redmond walked slightly behind his left shoulder, and there were others further back, but she barely registered them. She was looking at Callum, at the way the square reorganized itself around his presence without him doing anything to cause it. A merchant stepped back from his stall. Two men who had been arguing near the well stopped and turned, and then lowered their eyes. A woman pulled her child to her side. He didn't slow. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He walked toward the inn with the particular unhurried certainty of a man who had never once arrived somewhere and been turned away. And then, from the alley to her left, another man emerged. A beta from one of the Western Lowland holdings, she thought, based on his colors, a man of rank. He saw Callum and stopped dead. He dropped to one knee in the mud of the square without hesitation. Without being asked, Calla pulled back from the window. She stood in the center of the room with her hand pressed flat against her sternum, over the journal, over the warmth that had flared the moment he came into her line of sight. She had suspected. She had been suspecting since the moment she watched his hand make that signal at her window and heard a voice outside stop mid-sentence. She had turned the suspicion over for 3 days in this room, examining it from every angle, and had reached the conclusion that there were very few men in this territory whose presence would cause a beta to kneel in the mud of a public square without a word being exchanged. Knowing a thing was coming didn't make it land more gently. She heard the innkeeper downstairs, the sudden deferential shift in his voice, and then footsteps on the stairs. Callum's, she thought, heavier and more deliberate than the soldier who'd been bringing her meals. A second set behind, then a knock. "It's open," she said. The door swung in. Callum filled the frame. He looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Redmond appeared at his shoulder, took in the room, and turned to say something quiet to the soldiers in the corridor behind them. The door to the inn room across the hall opened and closed. Boots retreated down the stairs. "Calla," Callum said. "Lord Vance told me I was a guest," she said. "He left soldiers at my door. I couldn't tell the difference." "You're not a guest." He stepped inside. "You're coming with me." "I'm aware." She picked up the wool cloak from the bed and put it on. "That's not what I want to talk about." He waited. She turned to face him fully. "You were in my cabin for the better part of 2 days. You ate my food and slept in my bed and let me treat your wound. And when I asked your name, you said Callum, and when I asked your purpose, you said traveler." She kept her voice level. "I watched a beta kneel in the mud of a public square because you walked past him. A man doesn't receive that unless he is considerably more than a traveler." Callum was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "He doesn't." "Who are you?" He held her gaze. "The Alpha King." She had known. She had known since at least the morning of the second day, had turned the knowledge over in careful increments until it was no longer suspicion but certainty. None of that made hearing it said plainly any less difficult to absorb. She nodded once, slowly. "And the 7 wolves," she said. "The night at my door. Yes? You were among them." "I was." She looked at him for a long moment. The warmth in her chest was present and steady, and she resented it profoundly at this specific moment. "You knew what I was," she said. "When you were in the cabin. You could smell it." Something moved across his expression. "I suspected. The scent isn't clear in someone like you. It doesn't present the way a full-blooded wolf does. But it was there, and you said nothing." "No," he said. "I didn't. I want you to understand," she said carefully, "that I'm not angry about the rank. I'm angry about the choice. You let me treat you as though you were nobody, and you made that choice knowing things about me that I didn't know about myself." She paused. "That's not a small thing." He didn't offer an excuse. He didn't explain himself or ask for her understanding. He stood there and took it, which she found, against her will, somewhat harder to stay angry at than she would have preferred. "We need to leave," he said. "Vance has soldiers in this town, and the longer we stay, the more of them become a problem." "I know. I've been mapping their shift changes for 2 days." Redmond made a sound from the doorway that might have been surprise. Callum's expression shifted. Not quite the adjacency to amusement she had seen in the cabin, but something in the same territory. "Then let's go," he said. They left through the back of the inn. Redmond had arranged horses. She was given her own this time, a bay mare that was calmer than the situation warranted, and she was grateful for it. They moved out of Crest Ferry at a pace that was brisk without being urgent, east on the road that led back toward the forest. She rode beside Callum. Behind them, Redmond and 4 others kept a loose formation. She was looking at the tree line when Callum spoke. "You read your grandmother's journal?" "Yes." "All of it?" "All of it." She kept her eyes forward. She was Omega-blooded. She hid it for her entire life. Apparently it passes through the line. "It does. You could have told me that. In the cabin." "Yes." "But you didn't." "No." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know how much you knew. I didn't know if telling you would help or what?" He didn't finish the sentence. She looked at him then. He was watching the road, jaw set, and she had the distinct impression that he was choosing words with a kind of care that didn't come naturally to him. That he was a man more accustomed to decisions than explanations, and explanations cost him something. She turned back to the road. They rode in silence for a while. The forest thickened as they moved east, the scrubland giving way to stands of birch and then to the deep pine she knew. The smell of it reached her before the trees did, which was new. Everything was new in that way, familiar things arriving earlier than they should, with more information than she'd had before. "How long does it take?" she said. "The waking. How long until it stabilizes?" "It varies." He glanced at her. "For someone with your level of dilution, it could be months. The senses come first. Then other things, more slowly. Will I shift?" A pause. "Probably. Eventually. It's harder to predict in partial bloodlines." "You don't know." "No one does," he said. "It hasn't happened often enough to have a clear pattern." She absorbed that. "So you genuinely don't know what I'm going to become?" "No." She found, to her own mild surprise, that this didn't frighten her. It should have, perhaps. The sensible response to discovering that your body was in the middle of an undefined transformation was fear. What she felt instead was something more like the sensation before a difficult preparation, the particular alertness of standing at the edge of something complex with the knowledge that you had the tools to work through it, even if you couldn't yet see the outcome. The fort appeared in the late afternoon, emerging from the hillside as they came around the eastern pass. She had heard of it, the Alpha King's northern stronghold, built into the rock itself. Black stone walls that continued the line of the cliff face so precisely that the structure and the mountain looked like one thing. It was larger than she had imagined. It was also, she noted, built for function rather than display. No decorative elements she could identify. Everything structural, everything intentional. She counted fewer men in the yard than a stronghold of that size ought to have held, which told her a meaningful part of the fort's strength was still spread along the border. They rode through the gate and into a courtyard where men were already moving to take the horses. Redmond was off his horse before it fully stopped, conferring quietly with a man she didn't know. She dismounted herself before anyone could help her, which she suspected was noted. Callum came to stand beside her. "You'll have a room," he said. "Private. Your things from the cabin will be brought. I sent men this morning." She looked at him. "My cabin. Your land. I've sent word to Drenwick formalizing the claim under my authority. Vance won't touch it." She was quiet. "It's yours," he said. "It was always yours. I'm not giving you something. I'm making sure what belongs to you is protected while Vance is still a problem." She nodded slowly. "All right." They were moving toward the main entrance when Redmond fell into step beside Callum, close enough that she caught the quiet edge of his voice. "A word," Redmond said, "when you have a moment." Callum glanced at him. "The council is asking questions," Redmond said, "about why we came personally, about the woman. Tell them it's a border matter. They're not going to accept that indefinitely." "They don't need to accept it indefinitely. They need to accept it for now." Redmond dropped back without pressing further, but she caught the look on his face before he turned away. Not disagreement exactly. the controlled expression of a man who had more to say and had calculated this was not the moment. She was given a room on the second level of the fort, which was sparse in the way that all the rooms here seemed to be. Stone walls, good bed, small fireplace already lit, a window that looked east toward the forest. Better than the inn in every practical sense, and considerably colder in the places where the inn had been warmer. She set the journal on the small table by the window. She was still looking at it when a knock came, and Redmond entered without waiting for her answer. "I want to ask you something directly," he said. He stood near the door, which she recognized as the stance of a man who was ready to leave quickly if the answer required it. "You came from a border cabin. You treated wolves from this territory regularly. You have blood you didn't know about. And now you're here." He looked at her steadily. "What do you want from this situation?" "My land back," she said, "which your king is apparently handling. My cabin intact, and an explanation that is given to me directly rather than managed around me." He studied her for a moment. "He's not good at explaining things." "I noticed. He's also," Redmond said carefully, "not himself. I want you to know that I say that not as a complaint, but as a fact. He has been not himself since the night he found you at the border, and it is affecting his judgment in ways that a beta cannot simply ignore." She looked at him. "Are you warning me or asking me something?" "I'm observing," he said. "What you do with the observation is your decision." He left. She sat with that for a long time, listening to the sounds of the fort settling into evening around her. The shift change in the courtyard, the distant voices of men at their evening meal, the specific creak of the floor in the room above that told her someone was moving around. She had felt Callum's distraction during the ride, had noticed the moments where his attention broke away from the conversation and returned half a second later, slightly recalibrated. She had noticed because she had been watching him, which she was doing more than she wanted to admit. The warmth in her chest had not diminished since he came into that square. She pressed her fingers against her sternum and breathed. Her grandmother had written, "I hope whoever wakes it is worthy of her." She didn't know yet. That was the honest answer. She didn't know him well enough to know, and she had too many grievances still unresolved to look at him clearly. The anger about the cabin, about the days he'd let pass without telling her the truth, about the things she'd discovered alone in a locked room that he could have told her himself. She wasn't ready to set that down, but she also wasn't afraid of him. She had looked at him across the room in the inn and felt the warmth flare and felt the anger sit beside it without canceling it out, two real things at once, and had thought, all right then. Both of these can be true. She was still thinking about it when another knock came, lighter this time, less certain than Redmond's. She opened the door. Callum stood in the corridor. He looked for the first time since she had known him in any form, slightly uncertain. It was a small thing. A fractional shift in the set of his jaw, a quality in his eyes that hadn't been there in the courtyard. She would have missed it if she hadn't been paying attention. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "Yes," she said. "You do." She stepped back from the door. He came in. The attack came before dawn. Calla was awake when it started. She had been awake for most of the night, sitting at the small table by the window with the journal closed in front of her and the fire burned low. Sleep had not been available to her. Too many things were still moving in her mind, too many pieces rearranging themselves into configurations she hadn't finished examining. Callum had stayed in her room for 2 hours the previous evening. He had told her about the border patrol, why they had come through the forest that night, 7 of them, in wolf form, checking the eastern boundary after the rogue attacks. He had told her about the wound, a rogue blade, and about the decision to cross the river rather than return to the fort because the patrol route required it. He had told her, with the particular difficulty of a man choosing honesty over comfort, that he had suspected what she was from the moment he woke in her cabin and known for certain not long after, that the scent of dormant shifter blood was faint but unmistakable to someone who knew it, and that he had said nothing because he had not decided yet what to do with the information. He had not framed this as a kindness. She had respected that. She had told him about the journal, about the warmth she had felt in the cabin, and what she now understood it to mean. She had been precise and factual about it, the way she was precise and factual about things that were difficult, and he had listened without interrupting. Which she was beginning to understand was simply how he listened. When he left, he had paused in the doorway. "I should have told you," he said. "In the cabin, I should have told you." She had looked at him across the room. "Yes, you should have." He had gone. She had sat at the table since then and had not slept, and was watching the eastern window begin to show the first gray suggestion of morning when her hearing caught something it shouldn't have. Not in the fort. Outside it. Movement. Organized. Deliberate. The specific rhythm of soldiers moving into position. Not the loose pattern of a patrol, but the tight formation of men who had an objective. She pushed back from the table and went to the window. The eastern view showed nothing. Whatever was happening was on the western or northern face, out of her sight line. She was at the door when it opened from the outside. Redmond stood in the corridor, already armed, his expression carrying the flat efficiency of a man who had been awake for this. "Stay in this room," he said. "How many?" He looked at her for half a second. "Enough." Vance moved faster than we anticipated. He has allies we didn't account for, a border lord from the Western Holdings who has been waiting for an opportunity. He glanced down the corridor. "We have the numbers. We just need— Where is Callum?" "Coordinating the northern gate defense. There's a second incursion on the eastern approach." He turned back to her. "Stay in this room, bar the door, and do not open it unless you hear my voice." He pulled the door shut. She heard his boots on the stone stairs, fast and descending. She stood in the center of the room for exactly 3 seconds. Then she went to the shelf beside the bed, where she had arranged her materials the previous evening. The things the men had brought from her cabin, her satchel still packed from the hasty departure. She took the satchel. She checked the contents. Wound packing cloth, drawing salve, the tincture for pain, the preparation she had been in the middle of when Vance arrived that she had finished 2 days ago in the fort's small storage room when they'd given her access to their supply cabinet. She put the satchel across her body and went out the door. The corridor was empty. The sounds of the fort had shifted, the ordinary evening rhythms replaced by something tighter, faster. She heard orders from the courtyard below, the clash from somewhere further north, and beneath it all the particular low sound that she now recognized as wolves moving in confined spaces, the controlled scrape of claws on stone. She went down the stairs. The great hall was partially empty. 3 men she didn't know were moving through it with purpose, heading north. 2 servants were against the far wall, pressed back and staying clear. Near the eastern corridor, a man was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall and one hand clamped over his thigh. Redmond's man. She recognized him from the ride, one of the 4 who had traveled behind them from Crest Ferry. She crossed the hall. "Move your hand," she said, crouching beside him. He looked at her. His face had the gray, slightly vacant quality of significant blood loss, but his eyes were tracking. "Move it," she said again. He moved it. The wound was a blade cut, deep but not arterial. She could see it hadn't hit the main vessel from the color and the rate of flow. Bad, but manageable. She pulled wound packing cloth from the satchel and pressed it in with both hands. "Hold that," she said, guiding his hand back. "Firm pressure. Don't let up." She bound it with a length of linen from the satchel, tight and quick. He watched her work with the focus of a man trying to stay conscious through concentration. "Can you stand?" she asked. "Yes. Get to the wall on the south side. Don't try to fight on that leg." She was already moving. The eastern corridor led to a secondary courtyard she had mapped in her first day at the fort, smaller than the main one, used for storage and secondary training. She had noted 2 things about it. It had a direct gate to the forest road, and the medicinal herbs in the storage room abutted its northern wall. It was also, currently, where the second incursion was happening. She heard it before she turned the corner, the sounds of combat sharp and close. She pressed herself against the wall and looked around the edge. 8 men, Vance's soldiers by their colors, had come through the eastern gate. 4 of the fort's guards were holding the corridor entrance. The fight was contained, but barely. The eastern gate was still open, and beyond it she could see more movement in the dark. And on the ground near the gate, Redmond was down. He was not unconscious. She could see him moving, trying to get his arm beneath him, but something had happened to his left side. He was moving wrong. He had managed to get himself partially behind a storage crate, but he was exposed from the gate side, and the man nearest the gate had seen him. She didn't think about it. She reached into the satchel and pulled out the preparation she had finished 2 days ago, the one she had been making when Vance arrived. Ground nightlock root and powdered stranglebloom, mixed to a specific ratio that her grandmother had taught her and that she had never needed to use at full concentration. Inhaled in quantity, it caused disorientation, temporary blindness, and an overwhelming need to breathe fresh air. She had made it as a precaution. She had not expected to use it this quickly. She pulled the stopper from the clay vial, held her breath, and threw it through the gap in the corridor into the center of the courtyard. The vial shattered on the stone. The preparation dispersed as a fine pale mist in the cold air. The effect was not instant, but it was fast. The man nearest Redmond stopped mid-movement. 2 others reached for their faces. The 4 fort guards, positioned closer to the corridor entrance and further from the dispersal point, were less affected, but she heard the confusion in their movements, the uncertainty of men who couldn't see clearly and didn't know why. She moved through the corridor while they were still sorting themselves out. She reached Redmond in 4 strides, crouched, got her hand under his arm. "Left side," he said through his teeth. "I know. I can see it." She pressed her palm against his ribs on the left. He flinched sharply. Cracked, probably. Not broken through. "Can you move?" "Yes." She got him up. He was heavy and she was not large, but she had been moving patients in awkward positions for 3 years, and she knew how to distribute weight. They moved back toward the corridor entrance. Behind them, she heard the fort guards recovering, heard the tide of the small courtyard battle beginning to shift. She got Redmond to the great hall and put him against the wall beside the other man. "Stay," she said. "That was Nightlock," he said. "Yes, you made a weapon. I made a preparation. Whether it's a weapon depends on the context." She was already checking his ribs, pressing carefully along the line. "This is going to hurt." "It already hurts." "More than." He made a controlled, contained sound when she found the worst of it. 3 cracked ribs on the left side, one that she thought might be fractured at the end. Nothing had punctured. She packed it and bound it as tightly as she dared. "Don't take deep breaths," she said, short and even. "If it gets harder to breathe, tell someone immediately." "Understood." He looked at her. "The king is at the northern gate." She was already standing. The northern gate was accessible through the main corridor on the fort's upper level. She had traced the layout in her first 2 days without consciously deciding to. She took the stairs 2 at a time and came out on the upper walkway that ran the interior length of the north wall. She stopped. Below, in the courtyard and beyond the northern gate, the battle was larger than the eastern incursion. Vance had committed more men here. She could see the press of them against the gate, which was holding but not easily. The fort's wolves were in the courtyard, some in human form, some not, and the combination of both was disorienting to watch, the battle moving between scales and speeds simultaneously. She found Callum. He was at the gate itself in human form, and something about the way the fight was moving around him was wrong. She watched for 2 seconds and identified it. He was fighting well, better than anyone else in the courtyard, but his attention was fractured. Twice in the span of those 2 seconds, he checked over his shoulder toward the fort's interior. Not the check of a tactician monitoring his flanks. Something else. Something that was costing him a fraction of his focus every time it happened. She was about to move when the man to Callum's left went down. The gap it created was immediate. 2 of Vance's soldiers pushed through it, and the one on the right had his blade angled for Callum's unguarded side. What happened next was not a decision. She had not made a choice. She had not weighed the options or determined an outcome. Something in her simply moved, and the moving happened before she understood it had started. It began as heat, not the warmth she had been carrying for days, but something completely different. Something that started at the base of her spine and tore upward with a speed that didn't allow for resistance. She had read her grandmother's words about the shift. She had understood them abstractly. She had not understood them at all. Her bones did not break. They changed. There was a difference. Breaking was damage, and this was not damage, but it was not gentle either. It was the forced revision of every structure she had spent 22 years inhabiting, and it happened in the span of perhaps 4 seconds. And those 4 seconds were the most physically overwhelming thing she had ever experienced. She hit the courtyard on 4 feet. She was smaller than the fort's wolves. She knew this distantly, the way you know the size of a room you've just entered before you've looked around it properly. Small, fast, with a clarity of sensory information that was almost too much to process. She could smell everyone in the courtyard, not as general sense, but as specific individual signatures. Could hear the separate heartbeats of men who were standing close together. Could see in the dark as though the torches were full daylight. The 2 soldiers who had come through the gap had not yet reached Callum. She reached them first. She was not large enough to stop them by force. She didn't try. She hit the nearer one at knee height, all her weight and momentum in a single point, and he went down sideways. The second man turned toward her, which meant he was no longer moving toward Callum, which was the point. Callum turned. She had a fragmented impression of his face, the shock, the immediate catalogue of what he was seeing. Then someone closed the gap in the gate line, and the battle sealed back around itself. And she was moving again because there were still men in the courtyard, and she was small enough to work the margins. She didn't fight. She disrupted. She moved between the gaps, cut off angles, pulled attention in directions that helped the fort's men and hurt Vance's. 3 years of treating battle injuries had given her a detailed understanding of human vulnerability, and she applied it in ways that didn't require size. The battle turned within 10 minutes. She knew it before she could have explained how. A shift in the pressure, in the sounds, in the way Vance's men began to move backward instead of forward. The northern gate held. The eastern courtyard was already clear. She shifted back. It was easier than the first time, which she found strange, and then stopped finding strange because her body knew what it was doing, even if she didn't. She came back to herself on the cold stone of the courtyard, on her hands and knees, breathing hard. The cold reached her all at once. She had been warm in wolf form in a way that human skin didn't replicate. Callum was beside her before she had fully oriented. He crouched in front of her. He didn't touch her. He looked at her face with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not the controlled neutrality she had catalogued, not the adjacency to amusement, not the fractured attention of the previous night. Something entirely unguarded, which on his face looked almost like alarm. "Calla, I'm all right," she said. Her voice came out rough. "Your first shift was unplanned, I know." She looked up at him. "It worked." His jaw tightened. Then quietly, "Yes, it worked." She sat back on her heels and let the sounds of the courtyard settle around her. The winding down of a battle. The voices of men checking on each other. Someone calling for the count. She heard Redmond's voice from somewhere inside, which meant he had moved despite her instructions, which she would address later. "Vance," she said. "Taken." 2 of his men brought him in when the gate was breached back. He looked at her steadily. "He'll stand trial, formal, before the council. Not here. No. In the hall, with every alpha who holds land in this territory." His voice was flat and certain. He moved against the border. He moved against the fort. He moved against... He stopped. She looked at him. "He'll stand trial," Callum said again, quieter. She nodded. Around them, the courtyard was beginning to settle into the ordered activity of aftermath. Men moving with purpose, injuries being assessed. She watched 2 of the fort's wolves shift back to human form near the gate. The ease of it, the practiced quality, and thought about how it had felt when she did it. Not practiced. Nothing like practiced. But hers. The amber eyes watched her. She had seen them in the dark days ago and not known them. She had seen them in the river light and known them as familiar without knowing why. She had seen them in the inn corridor, over 40 feet of courtyard, and understood everything she needed to understand about who this man was. She looked at them now and felt the warmth in her chest that had been present since the night she reached into the dark beside a river and found a wolf's wound and decided, as she always decided, that she would treat it. "Redmond told me," she said, "that you've been not yourself." Callum was quiet. "He said it was affecting your judgment." "He's not wrong." She looked at him. "You were checking for me during the fight. That's what you were doing when the gap opened." He didn't deny it. "That could have gone badly," she said. "Yes. You can't do that." "No," he agreed. "I can't." He held her gaze. "I'm aware that it's a problem." She sat with that for a moment. The cold was pressing in properly now. She was exhausted in the specific way of a body that had done something large and new and hadn't finished accounting for it. The courtyard was lit by torches and the thin first light of dawn that was beginning to show over the eastern wall. And she was sitting on cold stone in the middle of an aftermath, which was not a dignified position. She stood. He rose with her. "My cabin," she said. "Your land is secured. Your claim is registered. Vance cannot touch it. I know that. I'm not asking about Vance." She looked at him directly. "I'm asking what happens now. I have land. I have a cabin. I have work I'm good at, and a life I built that I'm not willing to set down just because something in my blood decided to wake up at an inconvenient time." She kept her voice steady. "What does any of this mean for that?" He held her gaze for a long moment. The dawn was coming in behind him, the eastern light beginning to reach the top of the wall. "It means," he said, "that whatever you decide to keep, I will not ask you to give up." She studied his face. He meant it. She could see that he meant it in the same way she could see everything more clearly now than she had before. No management, no softening. Just the plain statement of a man who understood what it cost to say it and said it anyway. "The bond," she said quietly. "Yes, you felt it from the beginning, from the night at my door, from the moment you sat in the mud and started working," he said, "before I'd seen your face clearly." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I need to sleep." Something released in his expression. "Yes, and I need you to stop making decisions around me without telling me things. That includes information about my own blood, about threats to my land, about anything that directly concerns me." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "Is that manageable?" "I'll do my best," he said. She walked past him toward the fort's entrance. At the door, she stopped and turned back. "Callum." He looked at her across the courtyard. "Your wolf," she said. "The night at my door, after I finished, before you left." She paused. "You stayed until I was inside with the door closed." He was quiet. "I noticed," she said. She went inside. Her room was as she had left it. Journal on the table, fire burned to coals, the gray morning light beginning to come through the eastern window. She added wood to the fire and sat on the bed and let herself feel the full weight of the night for the first time. The shift, the courtyard, Redmond's ribs, the preparation she had thrown. The amber eyes across the fort's courtyard. Her grandmother's words were on the table in front of her, in the journal she had carried inside her vest across 3 days of captivity. And for the first time since reading it, she let herself think of her mother without the old blankness that thought usually opened. Fear then. Fear and blood and a woman who had chosen distance over what she did not know how to face. It did not make the leaving smaller, but it gave it shape. Beside that, her grandmother's silence settled differently too. Still painful, still wrong in ways she would not pretend otherwise, but no longer formless. The two absences belonged to the same inheritance, and now that it was awake, she would not leave either of them undefined. She had been ready. She hadn't known it until the moment she was, but she had been ready. Outside the window, the forest was beginning to resolve itself out of the dark, the individual trees becoming distinct, the sky behind them shifting from black to deep gray to the first thin suggestion of blue. The border forest, visible from this room, her forest,